There's a big difference between creating a black character and creating a character who is black. And I'm going to go into the details of the differences between the two in this video. When you create a black character, it's a very, very shallow experience. You're just creating a character who is based on the surface of a culture. And when you create a character who is black, you're going to get a richer, more multidimensional experience from that character. And my first experience in learning the difference between the two, when I was writing the screenplay All About Marilyn. This is the book right here, All About Marilyn. Um, and on that, when I was writing that screenplay, that was my first real writing experience, where I learned the difference between creating a black character and creating a character that is black. Because when I first started writing this story, I learned, I learned that when you focus solely on the black portion of the character, the ethnicity, that's all that's going to come to the forefront. But when you focus on who the character is, what their personality is like, what their voice is like, all of that's going to come to the forefront instead. And that's why it's important to just create a character who is black versus creating a black character. Because in the comic book industry, they often create these black characters, and all we see, primarily is their ethnicity. All we see is, with your Falcons or they're the black guy, and there's nothing special about them as people. They never really build up, that distinct voice or that distinct personality. Versus, a character who is black, they have a voice, they have a personality. When you're writing them, they come alive. They have extra depth and extra dimension. Um, they're really designed to be more of a main character versus this other character who's really designed to be an ancillary supporting character. And this is why it's important for, especially black fantasy and science fiction writers to create characters who are black be, rather than creating a black character. Because when you create a character who is black, again, you have that multidimensionality, you have that voice, and you have a solid foundation for a character who can carry a story versus being a supporting character in a story. And there's a big difference because when you engineer a main character, they're a lot stronger, and they have all these other elements around them. And when you create a supporting character, usually they're just there to support the main character and help out. They're not really as fleshed out as the main character because they're not. Your job is not to carry the story. A supporting character's job is just to help move the main character's story along. So there's a huge difference between the two. I mean, I've read a lot of comics and a lot of fantasy books, and I understand the difference between your main character and your supporting character, and when you design again when you design the character who is black, they come across a lot stronger. They have a lot stronger voice. They have a lot of alpha male or alpha female personality traits, and you really want those because those are leadership character traits. They show the strength of the character. They show the intelligence of the character. They show the creativity of the character, and they show that the character is someone important to the should be somebody important to the reader that they should be focused on. And it's something that I learned over time as a writer. I learned this technique, and it helped me tremendously in writing different books like You're All About Maryland's, um, your My Temptation of John Haynes, one of uh, Temptation of John Haynes, the fantasy novel I've always been talking about in many videos. This is another book I where I learned where I applied the character who was black technique, um, and it led to a much stronger reading experience for the reader, and it led to me, being able to tell a richer story to the reader. And you really want to do that when you're writing African American fantasy fiction, and African American science fiction, because these science fiction and fantasy are really social commentaries about the world around us. And when you want to tell, and what you want to do is you really want to give people you know a picture of what it would be like to have this black experience, because when you create the characters who are black, you're giving them that richer reading experience, and you're giving them that multi-dimensional reading experience where you're not just getting he's a black guy and these basic character traits, like I've seen in many shows, like your Cleveland's on Family Guy, he's just a very shallow character, or many other comic book characters I've seen where the character they just have basic, what we call quote unquote black stereotype traits, but they don't have any humanized character traits. And I found like it's like when I started writing with this technique, it really it was an eye opener for me. I remember when I was writing all about Maryland, it was an eye opener for me when I started using this technique, and I just saw a complete difference in the way I told stories, about African Americans overall, and I saw how and when I started really rereading it, I was like, this is completely different than say a book that I did, like the first ISIS book, where it wasn't as rich and it wasn't really as complex. And because it was complex to a point, but it wasn't as richer reading experience. It wasn't as immersive as All About Maryland or The Temptation of John Haynes was, where it was a richer a reading experience, and you started seeing people and in your mind, and you started imagining what these people were like, and you started imagining their personalities and their voices, and you started being able to do things like read between the lines and see the nuances of the characters, and really get into their stories and see these other layers, such as contrast, your ironies, your foreshadowing, your symbolism. All of that stuff really started to come out, because instead of me seeing just a black character and just saying he's a black guy, I started seeing a complete person. And this is something I really believe is very important for us to see in African American fantasy and science fiction, because again, this is our commentary on how we see the world. And that's really what the core of fantasy and science fiction is that it's how we see the world today and how we can see the world tomorrow. And those two elements are very important, because um, the comments we're making about today really reflect how we visualize tomorrow. And you know, I really try to make an effort to make that type of statement, and the only way for me to make that type of statement, is to really understand people and understand, what belies the surface. Because when you have your black character, there's really not that much there. I mean, I've read a lot of so-called black characters in comics, like your again, like your Falcons, your War Machines. They're great characters. They're nice. They have nice visual designs, but there's not really much there in terms of personality. I mean, oftentimes I would say to myself, I can read the dialogue between two of them, and I could change it, interchange it. And you really don't want to be able to say that you can do that as a writer, because when you can interchange characters, dialogue and voice, it really does not. It really says that they're not very strong. But when I do a story, like you know, Isis, Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, here, you really start to hear the characters' voices, and the characters' voice becomes their own, their dialogue becomes their own, and you go right off the bat from reading the prose. You go, oh, I know who that is, or yeah, that's Isis, or that's John Haynes, because the voice is so strong and the personality is so strong, and that's what you really want, because that's what a main character is. A main character is a very strong character. They establish pretty much clearly from the first page or the first 5 pages, who they are, what they want, what their obstacles are, and that sets the tone of the book, and it sets the direction of the book, because again, they're alpha characters, they're not beta characters, and that's something you really want to put into a story when you're writing a story. is that you want to show that this is now a main character. And when it comes down to black characters, oftentimes, a lot of people, they just think, oh, we just create a black character, like, for example, like your Black Firestorm, but they did in DC Comics a couple years ago, and think that that's diversity. That's not really diversity. Again, that's surface diversity, because you're just creating a black character. You're not creating someone that is going to give somebody, perspective on what it is to be black, or the black culture, or the black experience. You're just creating, ancillary character who's just going to sit in the background. Yeah, they may get a series or two, but there was nothing really built around them. There was no foundation, for them to develop on. And when I design, characters that are black, there is this foundation that they have. Like Isis has a strong foundation. She's built up, a pretty decent rogues gallery. She has relationships with supporting characters. She has relationships with villains. Same thing with John Haynes. He has, a strong supporting cast, relationships with villains, and there's a lot of character interaction, and that character interaction gives you a bigger and broader picture of the character. Also, the same thing with the East Team character. Most recently, I've been building up her supporting cast, and I've been building up, her relationships with the bad guys such as Lucifer and other various demons like Delilah, and just building it up. And we start seeing people, and we don't see just an ethnicity. And this was, you know, something I had noticed over the years, and with my own writing technique, and then watching other stuff like like those old school Super Friends episodes with characters like your Black Vulcans and your Eldorados and your Apache Chiefs. Again, that's a clear example of what a ethnic character is, versus a character who is black. Like for example, I know some people will say that Claudine Wolfe isn't really a black character, but I kind of see her as one, and but she's designed on that same technique, and again, it's a richer, more multidimensional character. I mean, Monster High movie videos aren't really that deep, but it's a lot. It's a whole different way of seeing a character. And when you see the character development, again, you see that strong voice, that strong personality. The character really can carry a story. They can carry their own stories, and it's a completely different way of writing a character. And it's something that, as a writer, you really have to take a look at and think about. And I want people to start thinking about that when they do write fantasy stories or when they read fantasy stories, because a lot of people, they talk about creating creating diversity and creating diverse characters, but they just don't understand what goes into that. And when you change your mindset, you start seeing characters that are black versus a black character. You start seeing things in a whole different perspective, and the character themselves starts coming to life, and we start seeing all of them. We start seeing that big picture, and that's very, very important when you're designing characters and you're telling stories, is that you really want to put that big picture up there, and give people that the biggest picture of this person, and so we can see all those shadows, highlights, and nuances that relate to who they are and why we should care about them. Because when you're writing a story, we really want the reader to connect with the characters and form that strong relationship. And the more depth and dimension you add to a character, the higher chances are that the reader's going to connect with them and have that relationship with them as they're reading the book and reading the story. And they're going to start, really feeling the story and, forming that, interpersonal relationship. Because some people, readers, they get really emotional about a character, and they start connect because it was what you put on the page makes them care so much. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so, gung ho about creating those characters that are black, so that people can have that relationship. And I've seen people have that relationship with the Marilyn character, the John Haynes character, the East Team character, and the Isis character, because they see people, and they see past, the surface of the skin tone. They see who they are on a human level, and that's very important when you're writing stories, because people really need to see that human level. They need to connect with that person in the story and identify with their experiences and relate to their experiences, and then even take something away from that story that they can apply to their own lives. And uh, this is very important, especially with black fantasy and science fiction, even black literature, because a lot of times black people and even non-black people, they don't really see black people, in a humanized light. And when you do stories like this, it helps them to see black people in that humanized light and connect with them on that human level, and really make efforts to move past race. And that's one of the things I try to do with my storytelling, is give people that positive experience and then really give them that connection to black people as people, so they can see our culture, our experience, our history, and see who we truly are. You can get all of my books, such as, All About Maryland, um, The Temptation of John Haynes here, and Isis, Wrath. Oh, sorry, that's upside down. Isis, Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, in paperback or on Kindle. Um, all of them, you can buy them in paperback, or in the case of Maryland, John Haynes, and Isis, Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, they are on KDP Select, or now known as Kindle Unlimited. So if you don't have any money, but you have Amazon Prime, or if you just get the 30-day trial, you can borrow any of these books. Um, and they're going to show you that rich reading experience, and you will see the very difference between a character who is black in these stories versus a black character.